Good morning, everyone. It is 9:30 a.m. and time for your favorite of all the committee meetings, Council Services. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from across the world. Next up is roll call. And to see if everyone's on their toes, we'll start with Councillor Jans. Councillor Jans? What you're saying is I shouldn't have changed the order and gone the other way. Councillor Rice?
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Cartmel might not, oh, he is. I see he's in another meeting and trying to join both, so he's there, but in the other piece of the meeting he's dealing with. Councillor Salvador. Councillor Salvador. No, Councillor Rutherford.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Hamilton.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Mayor Sohi.
I'm here.
Good morning, Councillor Tang.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Paquette.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Stevenson.
Here, and delighted that you're going in the opposite direction.
Absolutely. Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
I'm here, Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright. No, I'm going to go back up and double check with Councillor Jans.
Here.
Thank you. And who else was we had Councillor Cartmel. We were just going to double check that his camera's on, but I don't know if you can wave. That's all right.
And so Councillor Wright has indicated that her computer is rebooting.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so she will join us when she can there. We will get moving right now. And
can you just check if Councillor Salvador has joined us?
Oh yeah, Councillor Salvador, thank you. That was the other one on my list. Councillor Salvador? No? All right. Well, that's enough to start the agenda. So with that in mind, I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Hamilton or Councillor Rutherford has unmuted. Whichever. Oh, by calling on both, they both muted because they were both polite. Councillor Hamilton.
I'll move the adoption of the February 8th Council Services Committee. I don't have if there was any changes to that.
No, we are good to go.
Nope. All right, as presented.
Thank you very much. We don't need a secondary committee, so please vote.
I'm a yes, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, from me.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I think there were two.
Councillor Rice, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Jans?
Slide.
Yes, for me, Tim.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. We'll sign you in. And Councillor Jans, we're just waiting for your vote on adopting the agenda, please.
Yeah, I'm a yes as well.
Thank you. We have all the votes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Please display the vote. And that is carried. Next up, adoption of the minutes from the November 15th, 2021 Council Services Committee. Can I get a motion for that?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I think I heard her first. Please vote unless there's any changes, errors, or omissions.
I'm a yes.
Thank you. I heard Councillor Wright.
Yep, so we're going to move Councillor Wright over from absent into yes, and we've got everybody else's votes. Chair, we've got 13 votes.
Thank you. Please display the vote. And that is carried. Protocol items. I don't have any that I'm aware of, so I think we're good to go there. Next up, selection of items for debate. I'll let you all click into eScribe, and I'll give it a moment in case it's not opened yet. The speakers list is open. And I see Councillor Stevenson up first.
Thank you. I'll select 6.3
Thank you.
and 6.4.
6.3 and 6.4. Thank you very much. Councillor Rutherford has removed herself from the list. I'm guessing to select those. Anyone else? I have not seen anyone else click on the list, so I'll take a motion to approve all remaining items.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Please vote.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. We have all the votes.
Thank you. Please display the vote. That is carried. Next up, request to speak. I don't think there are any requests to speak. What? How could nobody want to request to speak for council services? I'm insulted. Request for time specific. Did you know this is also be a comedy hour? Is that why everyone's enjoying the jokes? Yes? Okay, great. I'm not that funny, I'm sorry. Next up, we'll move to item 6.3, and that is the council vaccination. I guess we didn't actually check to see what items have been approved, so we should probably officially do that. We'll
So
I figure we should, I didn't actually ask what items we approved, and we should probably do that.
Yeah, thank you. And just before we do that, I just want to double check. Councillor Salvador is saying she was here for approval of the agenda, and I just want to ask to make sure that that was recorded properly. Yep, we've got it.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you, Councillor Salvador.
Thank you.
And just to confirm, committee has already approved item 6.1, the 2022 Common Travel Plan, Office of the Councillors, and 6.2, the Common Furniture Plan, Office of the Councillors.
Excellent, thank you very much. That's what I have as well. Therefore now, I should double check for councillor inquiries first. It's like I haven't done this in a few months. I didn't get any notice of that, and I don't see any, so we are good to go. Next up, now we will start on to item 6.3, which is the council vaccination policy verbal report. And I believe that is being led by
Mr.
Mayor
Chair, we
Sim.
have one for the agenda management time specific.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Item on the agenda.
Yeah, you're doing a much better job of holding me to the actual agenda. Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
I know I thought it was an opportunity to kind of
Return the favor. Thank you.
yeah.
Well, let us start on 6.4. And I think you are actually leading this discussion, Mr. Mayor. Is that correct?
I think both of us are, right?
Okay,
So, but
yeah.
I'll try to set the frame in a way that we can have a very robust discussion on this. I'm glad that everyone is here. So let me know when you want me to go.
Go right ahead, Mr. Mayor. Yep.
Yeah, so this is about improving the process for us to conduct our business at council and also our business at committees, sorry. And we have a very ambitious agenda in front of us, and there are items that are coming forward from previous motions. So when I look at the next 6 months, we are going to be very, very, very busy in getting things done. So looking back at the last 100 days and the way all of us have participated in the meetings, we had a very robust discussion on items. I'm glad that we had those discussions, but sometimes because of the constraints on the times that we have in council and in committees, it becomes difficult for us to complete the items that we have on the agenda. So they get bumped from one meeting to the other. And that has consequences, not only for those items that are being bumped, but also other items that needed to be on the agenda don't get on the agenda, right? So I think I thought this will be a good opportunity for us to actually, as a group, come together, learn from our past 100 days, what has worked well, what hasn't worked well, and discuss that, and then figure out the best way for that we can get the work done, have everybody participate in an effective way, but at the same time, we are able to manage our time and agenda and move forward on it. Yeah. So that's kind of the frame to this discussion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there's a few ways we can handle this. There has been a bit of a draft of a few different points of conversation we could discuss to try to keep the conversation a bit more focused instead of just trying to throw 100 different ideas. That's how I'd like to proceed, if that works. And then what we'll do is we'll try, I think we'll have enough time to go through everything. So if we've gone through a few of these items that I think have been highlighted for us to discuss, and there's some other ideas that you have that weren't included in these upcoming ideas, we'll still set aside some time so that folks can bring that up if that is agreeable to members of this committee. And I'm seeing a few nodding heads, so I'm gonna go with that approach for now. And these are some topics that were provided, again, just as some guidance for us for different things we might want to decide. And it's broken into about 3 different areas. So one of them relates to the agenda release, which council has had a discussion on, but not this council. One is review of current agenda management tools, and some other potential opportunities that we might want to explore. And so I think what we'll do, again, to try to keep this conversation efficient, is we'll go through those one at a time and see what's on people's mind, and then we'll go from there. But I'll keep my eye on the speakers list, so if there is any guidance or if you have some suggestions as we're going through this to make this better, please do not hesitate to let me know. So the first was agenda release, and what was suggested in here, as council now is aware and committee is aware, agendas are released 10 days before the meeting. That was a change that was brought forward last term. In the past, it used to be done the Thursday before. Now it's done sort of 2 Thursdays before the committees. So I know when we had discussed this last term, there was a huge push from council to have this, as was a request from the media, and I think we even heard from members of the public about having more time. What I think wanted to be flagged in this is that by doing that, there is an impact, of course, to city staff. There can at times be late reports that don't meet the deadline, and that can have items that are coming in after the fact. So just wanted to get a sense of where people are at. Are people happy with the current approach, knowing that many members of this council have not operated under the old system? But just thought we should quickly check on this one and get people's feedback. So we're going to keep this a little more informal, so you don't have to ask questions upon clicking in. You don't have to try to figure out a way to share your feedback by just asking a question. You can just share your feedback on this. So I'll start with Councillor Stevenson. And I should note, if you're comfortable with it, you probably all don't need to click in and say you're comfortable with it. I'll make that assumption. If there's maybe opposing views on this particular one, feel free to jump in, but I'll start with Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think that the Thursday release for all the meetings the following week was certainly a very tight timeline for many people. That said, I do my reading over the weekend, the weekend before the week. So it's not something that I'm certainly not looking at the reports when they're 10 days out, just to be transparent about that. I wonder if there's maybe a compromise there where instead of 2 Thursdays before, it's the Monday, so that if it's released on the Monday, the earliest meeting the next week is Monday. So there's a week from the earliest meeting. Just a thought.
Great, thank you. And I guess I should probably give an opportunity for administration to provide any feedback on that, knowing that that has been a conversation topic. I want to get a sense of comfort level, what you feel is sort of the impacts that you're seeing, and just so we have that knowledge.
Yeah, sure, Councillor. I would say that it's certainly a challenge to meet the 10-day deadline. We don't always meet it, but I think we keep pushing, and I think we most of the time meet it, so it's okay. I would not support a Monday release because that'll inevitably mean people will be working all weekend. So I'd rather have a Thursday or Friday release before the Monday, because I just know how things work, and that way we get it done Thursday or Friday, as opposed to working on Saturday, Sunday to get it done, which just human nature. So I would rather go with Thursday and Friday, even if it's earlier than the Monday release.
Appreciate that feedback. Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Rice next.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. So from my experience, I'm actually happy for the current agenda release schedule. Just one item, and then with the existing agenda release schedule, if we could include the reports to indicate which report is just information only, which one is a decision required. And because that's for us to do our homework, and specifically, I spend a lot of time, like Councillor Stevenson mentioned, weekend and to review all the materials, and specific for the decision-making items, excuse me, decision-making items, and then needs more attention, and sometimes needs to do more research, and needs to reach out to administration to seek more information, and before actually that they come in. I think that would be helpful for us to know in advance which item is just information only, which item is decision making required. I just think that would be helpful.
Mr. Colville, do you want to?
I thought we were doing that, but I will go back and check. And I thought we were because we did change the formatting of the reports since last term. So I will go back and check and see. That was certainly the intent, is to make it very clear at the front end of each report whether it was for information or decision. So I will go back and triple check that.
A full report, yes, it's very clear. So I think I would be suggested this includes in the formatting of agenda, and for example, just on the right hand, and say this item is information only, this item is decision making required. But in the report, specific reports, yes, it's very clear indicated. I just want to clarify that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that feedback. Mayor Sohi is next. Or you said it, Councillor Rice, just to double check. Anything else?
Yeah, that's only one item. Thank you for checking.
Thank you. Mayor Sohi?
Yeah, and I understand what Andre is saying on releasing reports on Monday, because our staff is already overworking hours, long hours, and all that, right? So we want them to have time with their family on weekends. So that's important flag. Thank you for that, Andre. One practical challenge that I have faced being here for a little while now is that all the reports get released at the same time, or like when we release the reports, they become available at the same time to the media, to the public, and to council members, which I like as a practice. I think it's good practice, right? But it's posing some practical challenges, is that because we have so many other things on our own agenda, that when media gets back to us on responding, asking for a comment on that report, we haven't had the actually chance to read the report yet, right? So I think that's a practical challenge where I have faced. So something to think about how we manage that, if we are open to maybe having the items released maybe a day in advance or 2 days in advance to council members, so we can flag items that could potentially be of interest to media, and then we can go through them and respond. Not to change the reports, not to modify the report, just for information only, so that we are better prepared. Something to throw out there. It's not a big deal, but something to think about. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that has been discussed in previous terms, and that is something that would be within our purview to change. Mr. Corbell?
Yeah, I would just say that it really is council's desire on that. There's nothing wrong with doing that from a legislative perspective. I think obviously transparency is good, but I understand the predicament. So it's certainly the will of council that we could do that if so desired.
Okay. Anything else, Mayor Sohi?
No, that's all.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see anyone else on the list for this particular item. So generally speaking, and again, we can still at any point in time, once we've gone through these, do a motion that would be recommendations to council, because we wouldn't be able to change any of these. If some of these might require bylaw changes, so we'd be able to recommend as a committee to council. So we can come back on some of these if needed. There are some other topics that I know are of great interest. So what I'll do, I'm going to make an assumption, although I see Councillor Paquette, I'll go to him, that generally speaking, I haven't heard anyone suggest we need to go back on the 10-day approach, but maybe some other items to talk about in the future about how early they're released to council compared to others. So Councillor Paquette?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to everyone for expressing your thoughts. I would just point out that, we give administration often very short timelines to come back to us with reports. And I know just from, following up with administration on certain questions and things like that, just how much pressure they have. I think it would be important to point out that after a couple of years of pandemic and economic challenges, we are not staffed on administration side the way the city once was. And that increases the pressure. So there are a few options. One is to ease up a little bit on council expectations, knowing that we get the reports at any rate, and that maybe when we get the reports, it does mean that we're going to be reading a lot and sometimes into the night, and I'm prepared for that personally. But the other option then was if there really truly was a desire for extended amounts of time to get these reports, maybe our timelines extend a little bit rather than being so compressed. Because while on council side, you may look at 12 weeks and be like, well, isn't that ample time? That's 12 weeks on top of all of the other accumulated work that builds up council meeting after council meeting. So just a flag on that. Just remember that we're dealing with human beings under very real human constraints and pressures. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So appreciate that. And what I'll do is I'm going to keep us moving into the next topic, which this one might generate a little bit more discussion, I'm guessing. So this one is just reviewing a few of the current tools that we have before us to influence debate and time. And there were sort of three themes that were provided to me that we might want to discuss or at least make people aware of. So one of which is the ability to use the call to question. So I should note that how it was broken down in committee, we cannot call the question to have the motion to end debate and vote. In council, that is something that can be done. It was done during budget once. It hadn't been used often over the years, but the way it works is that call the question with unanimous consent, the debate is end and the vote is called. Or a motion is required, which would require a special resolution of 9 of 13 members of council to call the question. So again, not necessarily anything to change there for us to discuss. That one is more of an information, something that we might want to share. And the other thing I'll think about is this email that I'm reading off of might be helpful at some point to provide to all members of council so that they have, although I think we've shared that over times over the orientation with some procedural pieces that might be helpful in the future to have that. So that's one of the pieces that was identified here. The other piece, again, just recognizing, and we know this through our last couple of months, multiple rounds of questions at committee, that happens without any vote. There is no consent required for multiple rounds of questions. At council, that is a requirement to have the consent of the assembly to continue with future rounds of questions. Again, that one doesn't require us to have any change per se, but just be aware that that is a tool that we have available to us to help influence how long we're spending on each item. Council has the right to not vote for additional rounds of questions, and we have the right to vote for them. Here's the one of the three that I think is going to generate some discussion, and we'll spend some time on this, is the time limits. And we've heard this discussed at a few different points in committee and council right now. We have 5 minutes to ask our questions each round, and then 5 minutes to speak when that happens. So there's some different ideas that we could approach. For example, we could leave it as is. That's what it's been for as long as I'm aware. That's a very valid option. There are options to have a reduced time limit in both committee and council. There's options to leave it at 5 minutes in committee because that is where we often spend more time in our discussion, but maybe shortening it at council. So again, there is no right or wrong answer here. This is actually just meant to generate some feedback from each of you to see how might you want to look at this. Are you interested in making a change? And if so, what does that look like? Do you want to go down from 5 minutes to 4 or 5 minutes to 3 or 5 minutes to something else? And would you do that at both council and committee, or would you do it just at council? The other piece is, would you do that only for questions or for questions and speaking to motions? So a couple of different things that I'd love to get feedback on, and we'll start capturing that. And if we get a sense through your feedback that there is an interest to maybe pursuing a change, that is something we could do at the end of this and compile a list of items. So I'll go to Councillor Hamilton first, who's on the list on this.
I'm just going to speak to the question of time with the 5 minutes that I have. Having been part of last council, I think I have a comparison. You know, I had my moments where I got really frustrated last council because we were going around and around on questions, and I'm sure that returning members of council will remember that. But I find by and large, when you hit a certain stride, it becomes less like, it's like 5 minutes actually isn't that much. It's definitely not that much to ask questions, especially if administration or speakers' answers are supposed to be encapsulated in that time. And it's not a ton of time to speak to something. And I say this as somebody who last term routinely underused the 5 minutes allotted, but find that when you need it, the 5 minutes is probably fairly appropriate. I think that something I've been contemplating as a committee chair is, more sort of asking for acquiescence from the committee, or asking acquiescence from the body, so that we, if it reports for information and it's to get some clarification for us, provide some feedback to administration, then maybe it's appropriate to say, well, why don't we limit this to one round of questions and additional questions that you think would be pertinent for the general public to hear, and then other matters perhaps you can do a follow-up with administration. That not everything needs to be discussed in public, though I think it's lovely that the public can be part of those conversations. I do hear increasingly so from members of the public that they feel that perhaps their time is not being used well. And they're looking for council to complete business, and I think that that's a fairly important thing for us, not only as councillors but as committee chairs, to remember that the purpose of the meeting is to complete business. So how, I think about guiding questions like, what information do we need to make a decision? Do we need more information? Do we have enough information? And that can guide the process on what we're supposed to do. Does this get referred? If we have enough information, we don't like it, vote it down, etc. So being really clear about what the avenues are, I think as a committee chair is our responsibility. But I'm not sure that, and I'm very reluctant to start tweaking the symptoms time, because that can have a knock-on effect of requiring more rounds of questions. So that's my resistance to changing too many things at once. I think more aggressive chairing might support timely agenda management here. So that's my feedback on that, and I think it'd be worth revisiting maybe halfway through the term. And I say that because, again, I think we've been through 1.5 proper cycles. And I absolutely share the frustration that we're not completing agendas. But again, we're not actually in a rhythm. We're in 1.5. We've gone sort of 1.5 turns here. So tweaking too many things, I don't think is really prudent. That's my feedback.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Rutherford next.
Yeah, so I did want to speak about it. I do not agree with changing the 5 minutes at this point, either at committee or at council, because as you know, Councillor Hamilton alluded to, it does go by really quick, especially if you do have a really complex question you've asked admin. Like I've seen them take up to three minutes to respond. So then we're just gonna have a bunch of overtime, right? Because we never cut off admin when they're responding anyway. And so I think, again, I go back to the conversation that we had in December, leading up to the budget and just our own self-discipline, because I've still also seen, when it's question time, people speaking for 2 to 3 minutes before they ask a question on this council. And maybe I'm guilty of it too, but I've been really trying to be mindful of, what are the questions I need to ask? What are the questions that I want the public to hear me ask? Because sometimes I actually already know the answer, but sometimes I want the public to know I'm asking those questions. And then, do I have enough information to make the decision? I also think, when we talk about speaking to motions, I'm trying to be more prudent in, I'll speak to the motion if I'm going to vote no and I want to give a rationale for why I'm voting no. So I don't just vote no with no rationale. Or if it's something I'm really passionate about, like housing, and I really want to bring that home, or I'm worried that, there needs to be some other thought putting to this to convince maybe if there's counselors that are on the fence. But I agree with kind of that comment that, we made it the other day about like, we don't all have to just speak for 5 minutes to say we agree with something. And so I think our votes also speak volumes. And at the end of the day, I think we need to be more mindful of even when we're speaking to the motions. The last thing I noticed, and maybe this is a conversation that's coming up, Andrew, but what I've been noticing with the agendas so far is it's not the agenda items and the questions that are taking up the time. It's motions and subsequent motions. And then the debates on the subsequent motions, and then the amendments to the motions, and then all of that cascading stuff. I think about last council meeting, I think 80% of our time was spent debating 2 motions that had come on the floor. So that's we're not even getting to our agenda because the motions are usurping the time. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I feel like it's not an issue of, something as simple as just cutting back from 5 to 3 minutes. I think it's more, when do we use inquiries? When do we do motions? When do we use notice of motions as opposed to subsequent? Because yes, subsequent are sometimes easier, but then it doesn't give anybody any time, other council colleagues, to process that information, process the impact of that motion. And so then we get into these longer debates. So I just feel like, and maybe that's coming up, but I feel like a lot of time suck is happening with motions right now and subsequent motions. And so my stance on the time is keep it the same. It's effective, and I do agree with Councillor Hamilton that it is, tweaking the symptom as opposed to the root cause.
Thank you, and thanks for that flag. I should mention, yes, the final item on this, for this particular agenda item, will review councillor inquiries and notices of motion. So we will talk about those items after we're finished talking about this 5 versus 3 minutes piece here. So thanks for flagging that, and we will take some time on that after. Councillor Wright.
Hi, good morning. I do agree with Aaron in regards to sort of limiting the questioning time to actual questions that where you need information, or maybe you want to provide information to other councillors to help them make their decisions. But I would rather leave the speaking to the motion at the 5 minutes and then use that time as the opportunity for councillors to sort of make their case, rather than filling that up in the questioning time. And so I would be agreeable to, I think it was Tim that had mentioned it, first round 5 minutes, second round 3rd.
Great. Yeah, so that is certainly an option too, of doing a second round at a reduced minutes versus the first round. So thank you for flagging that. Next up, I see was there anything else, Councillor Wright? No. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Stevenson is next.
Yeah, I'm also supportive of the idea of having shorter second rounds. I think a first round of questions at 5 minutes is great, and then a second round at 3 minutes. I personally am very supportive of reducing the speaking to time. I think that I think 2 to 3 minutes is fine for that, and I think a lot of points get made through the questions. So that would be where I go. I'd also just caution about the potential of doing follow-up written questions, just knowing that that generates a lot of work for administration. So actually, I maybe just have two questions for administration as well, just to confirm that the preference would likely be to deal with questions in the session, which may not be true. Looking forward to your feedback on that. And also just what I've struggled with at times as well is that it feels very rude to cut administration off while giving an answer. But sometimes, I am looking for a more succinct answer to manage the time that I have. So just wondering about your thoughts on that, how we manage that relationship.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. On the first one, I would say not a great answer, but it depends. We've had questions that have caused 300 hours of work, and we've had questions that have caused 5 minutes of work. So it really is, sorry, it depends answer. I think if we can get an answer replied to in a very timely fashion, I think that's super efficient. But if the question does result in 40 hours of work, it is difficult and becomes a burden on administration. So maybe, and I think it's very difficult to sort of cap the time it would take and get into those kind of rules. So I think we just have to take a pragmatic approach. On the second, I think we realize that we too try to work on our being concise and replying directly to the question. And I think I would say I appreciate how councillors have interjected, but in a very respectful way, and said just need to get my other question in. So I think that relationship piece is okay right now from our perspective. We understand the time limits, so we will always try to be concise in our replies.
Great. And I don't know if I'm just wondering if there's room for talking about limitations on the length of presentations as well. And I know that's a really challenging one because sometimes there really are just complex reports that require time, but I know that there sort of isn't currently a time limit on administration presentations.
There is not. We would be open to one, certainly. We have been working on getting our presentations concise. I know my office and the Chief of Staff in particular do a lot of deleting of slides as we review presentations, and I think that needs to be an ongoing, continuous piece of work as we try to get concise. So we'll do that, but if we were given a time limit, we could work within that. But maybe as a start, we just try to be more concise, and we can take that back.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, this is maybe just another question, but I think that we could start to move to having fewer presentations as well. But I think what would be important is providing administration with a heads up potentially about what we may or may not want presentations on, just to avoid a lot of time being spent preparing presentations that aren't ultimately given. But that's going a bit more broadly.
I appreciate that. The idea of presentations is an interesting one that maybe we want to think about, because I don't think we would really give direction as a councillor committee either way on that, but appreciate that there's some comments around that. Go ahead, Mr. Corbould.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I would just say that just because a presentation is not given in council doesn't mean it's a waste of time to put it together, because quite often those presentations are used within the city organization. And so I think sometimes if the presentation is really good, it doesn't need to be presented because you've seen it and you can go straight to questions, and we don't see that as an issue whatsoever. So.
Okay, great to know. Thank you so much. No further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will keep this very concise. I'm very open to Councillor Wright's suggestion around having a shorter second round. I think that it enables us to keep that conversation flowing and holds us to account in some regard to keep ourselves disciplined. I do find value in having the full 5 minutes for when we're speaking to motions. I think that, I have yet to use my full 5, but I'm sure there will be items where I do feel very strongly or feel the need to provide just that very clear rationale for folks who are listening, and that has some pretty significant value for me. That's all I wanted to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, look how quick that was. We can shorten it to 1 minute. Mayor Sohi.
Yeah, so on the 5-minute limit for speaking or first round of questions, I just want to introduce my practical challenge. English is not my first language, and I speak slowly because of sometimes I do struggle to find the right word to express my views. I think so. Having 5 minutes is appropriate in that way. But I agree that maybe second round for questions we could look at 3 minutes. But I do want to introduce something for us to consider on the committees, the tool that is available to us at council, which is asking a consent from members of council for second round and third round. Maybe we need to introduce that at a committee for not for second round, maybe for when we go into third round, so that committee members, if one person is going on for some particular reason beyond 3 or second round, right? Or beyond after finishing second round, maybe it requires consent of committee members whether to go into third round. That might also deal with some of the questions that Councillor Hamilton has identified on information reports, right? So something to think about, having that tool available, because at this time there's no tool available for committee chair to either call into question or limit the number of rounds that a member can go on. Something to think about.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Mayor Sohi. I should check, is that, for that change maybe to the clerks, is that something that would be through our procedures? If we were actually interested in exploring that, does that require a motion, or is that something a committee chair could do themselves?
No, that's what has been suggested is actually against your bylaw. So if that's something you want us to explore,
that
I
would
need to
actually
take
require
that away,
bylaw change.
because I'm not sure if that's in. I just need to check. There's different versions about how that could happen. So if that's what you want us to do, happy to take it away.
And not necessarily, I just wanted to double check so that we have that information for ourselves as we're going through that. That would require potentially a bylaw change, as we've heard, but something we can reflect on. Councillor Jans.
Thank you. Maybe this question is for the city clerk. Could the clerk clarify what is actually written about the 5 minutes for questions?
So thank you, Councillor John. So I was just looking that up. So just for reference, so in the council's procedure bylaw, each approved speaker can speak for up to 5 minutes. I'm just trying to find it, Councillor Jans. Can you ask another question and I can try to find the right section? I'm multitasking here.
Sure. I guess I'm wondering what is the difference between a sentence that is a statement of fact and what is a statement that is a question? And if so, I think both those questions thus far are questions, but this sentence is not. So if we were a little stricter in the actual questions that you have to ask, so I actually would prefer to go more of a talking circle type of situation where each counselor gets to ask one question and it has to be an actual question and you can have one follow-up and then it goes to the next person. This allows many other people to ask questions, so it allows you not to feel like you have to ask all of your questions right in the 5 minutes. So what I was wondering is if our rules already state it must be questions, then that certainly tightens it up. But I do think a dramatic, I've said this before, but I do think a reduced speaking time for questions would be really important. At least if we had it to 1 or 2 questions per person, the debate we can still keep at 3 minutes or 5 minutes. But I do believe if more of us get more turns to speak, chances are somebody else will ask your question, maybe even more thoughtfully or more articulate than we may, right? Like there may be a different approach at it, and then I'm filibustering to buy you time.
No, I found it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Not to use up too much of your time. So actually, to that question, the bylaw under section 38 actually does speak to questions as well as speaking in relation to a single item. So forget what it says. If council wants to change how to use those 5 minutes or change those 5 minutes to 3 minutes, All of that is possible. We just need to get direction from council, and we can bring you back options and a bylaw amendment.
Okay, my preference would be one question, one follow-up question, next speaker, one question, one follow-up question. Once we go through one round, we can do another round if we have to. That would, I think, be much tighter, much better, and then we can go to debate after the fact.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Councillor Jans? No? Okay, perfect. Councillor Tang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I will. I guess a few points on this particular item. And I guess having worked on the admin side as well, I'm very aware of the constant push to be concise, and there's multiple layers. So by the time the material that we have is as concise as it can be, and so I do want to just appreciate and recognize admin for doing that. Can we do better? For sure, and I imagine it's a constant internal process as well. I think on the speaking time, you know, I think I can go either way. I feel like I'm the kind of person who, if we set some parameters with a decision, I rather we just try it and reevaluate at the next council services meeting. But I do like the graduated time slots proposal that many of my colleagues have suggested. I feel like, you know, as much, we also need some parameter to really kind of force us to do that. So I think some kind of parameters will be helpful. I think the other thing too is I imagine that all my colleagues are, there's lots of reading done beforehand and lots of preparation of your questions that we do as much as we can to prepare those questions, to be in an effort to be concise and to ask the most pertinent questions. But I recognize that sometimes, you know, thinking on the fly and asking questions on the fly is also a skill that will develop over time. So anyway, so that's why I like that graduated time slot. But I'd rather not limit how many rounds of questions we have. I've said this before, but I really feel strongly that asking questions is probably one of the most important tools we have as governors. But then I guess it's kind of self-contradictory because it's unlimited 4-minute, 3-minute, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose of this conversation, right? Anyways, so I can go either way, but I think some parameters to really discipline is helpful, and I just think we should just try something until the next meeting. And then I think my other thing that I wanted to raise is just a suggestion for on days when we have lighter agendas, but I'm not sure, but Mr. Chair, I imagine that might be in your kind of third stream of discussion, or should I bring it up now?
Maybe bring it up now just to double check. You're talking about the agenda flow?
Yeah, just like on days when we have lighter agenda, rather than just ending a meeting early, I am wondering if we can repurpose that for council continuation, which I recognize takes a little bit more planning and anticipation and, you know, scheduling on all of our parts. But I just want to throw that out there because I feel like at this rate, we're never going to catch up.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Paquette?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just listening very, very closely. Madam Clerk, you know, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like all of this is mostly just meeting management. And don't we already have the tools and techniques in place and the parameters through the authorities given the chair and to council and committee to ensure the flow of meetings?
I think that would be a question better answered by Councillor Paquette.
Okay. All right. I'm just talking about with the rules that are available that may not be implemented and with the authorities that are available that may not be currently implemented. It seems to me that we might have those tools, but point taken. Yeah, so I guess I'll just speak to this a little bit then. We do have those tools. If a question, if someone is asking their question and it's not a question, or if someone is offering an enormous amount of unnecessary preamble, and that is a pattern that we know is going to happen. A gentle reminder can keep things back on track. I am very concerned about going in and starting to meddle with a format that has worked extremely successfully in the past, simply based on what potentially could be inexperience in the moment. I have seen development and improvement over time. I only anticipate more development and improvement over time as councillors become more familiar with the processes. So I am actually quite concerned with the idea of meddling with format simply because folks aren't sure how to manage themselves. I think that self-management is entirely within everyone's capacity, and I don't think that we have to change the entire process to accommodate that. This would be a question better left to individual councillors for some introspection. Am I respecting the time of my colleagues? Am I respecting the time of administration? Am I respecting my own time and the time of my constituents, and preparing adequately for my meetings? At some point, when do I say, I will not have all the information that would make me comfortable making this decision, and then you decide whether to vote for it or not? Because frankly, there's no way for generalists, which is what councillors are supposed to be, to have specialist knowledge on every single item. But you do have to be able to use your judgment. And so I personally think that all of this can be handled with meeting management and with self-regulation. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I would like to share the same frustration from Mayor Sohi. English is my second language. I only speak English in even not 20 years. For me, yes, sometimes it's very difficult and a challenge to find the concise way and proper words to ask a question. However, no matter what decision our council made, and regarding this time stream and short time or any other process, I have no problem to adopt that. So I just want to share my attitudes for that. And because since I become councillor, I focus on self-development and self-efficient, and how could I conduct my questions in the chamber to respect everybody's time. I worked with administration and get support from them, and then try to achieve the outcome. Actually, what I heard my colleagues is talking about today. So that is why I say I have no problem for this. However, I want to bring two comments. The first comment is about what's the purpose and for us to ask a question and to debate in the chamber. Is there any public purpose specifically beneficial for everybody? And then when we make such decisions, we need look at why we ask certain questions, why we don't ask certain questions, and what is the purpose, what is the outcome we would like to achieve. So this first point I would like to share. The second point is about actually the length of the question we ask, or how many rounds we ask a question, is related back to the preparation and for our councillor ourselves, and for all the reports and information we received from administration. So I think that is actually from my thinking, how I look at this is a systematic question, and is linked back to the first item we discussed about the agenda release time. And because that will impact our preparation and for the questions we're going to ask. I think that is my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no other names, so I'm going to just jump in. I know we haven't heard from everyone, but I'm going to summarize what I've heard, and then maybe we can move on to the next item and come back to this. So I've been trying to summarize and highlight a few areas where we might have possible decision points. Generally, what I've heard is most who have spoken so far are either comfortable with the 5 minutes as currently the case for the first round in the speaking, and some who are indifferent to longer or to the same or to shorter, and just a couple that I think that were more interested in shorter right off the bat. So unless I hear anything, I think from the idea of a first round in speaking, there seems to be generally consensus around retaining 5 minutes. I have heard some feedback, though, on maybe subsequent rounds being shorter, and I know that point got brought up a few speakers in, and so some of the original ones might not have responded to that, but I saw a few nodding heads when those comments were coming up. So that is something we might want to include on a possible motion for us to discuss once we've gone through the other item, because I've heard enough folks bring it up. I don't know if there's a majority support, but I think we should probably vote on that as a consideration for us. But I haven't heard enough people suggest that we should change the 5 minutes for speaking or change the 5 minutes for at least a first round. So somebody's welcome to put forward that motion, but I just haven't heard that from a majority of councillors to date, or from so far. So those were the main themes. There were some other points that were brought up that may need discussion at a later meeting, but I think those would be the main points to talk about for this particular part. So unless there's anyone else who wants to talk on this, I think we can move over to the procedures, and that would deal with inquiries and notice of motions. So I'm not seeing anyone else click on the list. So what we'll do is once we've discussed this next item for inquiries and notice of motion, we'll see if there's any particular action items from this, and we'll combine that in likely a multi-part motion that itemizes the various pieces we've discussed so far. And again, if at any point in time you think this you'd like a different process, let me know. Please keep me. But I think we're making good progress on this, and we still have plenty of time to finish the agenda. So. But this one may require a bit more time. So there are a few options for our consideration here when talking about councillor inquiries and notices of motion. What's before us, as we know, is that inquiries can be made at the committee that they're going to be coming back to, and they can be made at a council meeting currently to date. We could change that to only allow inquiries at the committee and not at council. That's within our, so I would say that's one point that we might want to discuss if we want to see where we make inquiries change. There is a requirement that, as of now, inquiries must be provided 48 hours before the meeting and must be submitted to the chair and to the clerks. We could change that to require it to be 7 days or any number of days beforehand if we want to ensure there's enough time for the chair and the clerks to verify that what's being requested is in fact an inquiry. So that's another decision point I'd love to get thoughts on. The next piece is notices of motion, and the way it's worked in the past is that a notice of motion must be made, and that would require 5 days. It can't be debated until 5 days after the notice is provided. We could change that amount of time. We could leave it as is. That's another piece to ask about. The other piece that is here for discussion would be how we want to make sure those are being used. The way it's currently used, inquiries are meant to request information that is already on hand within administration. Ideally, that should have been verified with administration before the inquiry is made. Whereas a notice of motion is going to require some type of work that isn't already on hand. It could be a small amount of work, it could be a large amount of work, but it would require some additional work. It could be, we could change it. We could say that, and whether or not we want to, this is part of it. So one of the suggestions here is, should notices of motion be limited to only providing information like inquiries currently request? And the only way to then do further action to get maybe further analysis or research would be when that report comes back to committee, that is when then you would do a motion to direct further action. That is an opportunity that could be on the table for us. The other, this one's maybe a little smaller, is just where we want to accept notices of motion. We've done notices of motion at committees as well as council. We could require that to be only at committees or only at council or whatever might be of interest. So there were a few different items there, I realize. And I think if we're going to try to focus this part of the conversation, a few key questions I would talk about is that the timing of both inquiries and motions. Do you feel that what we have right now is reasonable versus not? We don't necessarily need to set what the time is today, but if we feel there should be a change, that's probably the first piece to discuss, whether we'd like the amount of time to change. Then the other piece is where we are allowed to make those inquiries and notices of motion. Should they change from what is currently permitted, or should they be kept the same? And then I think the final piece is what notices of motion can actually request and what inquiries can request. So maybe three central themes that I have that might help direct some of this conversation. So I see a few speakers on the list, and we'll start with Councillor Stevenson.
Sure, just a few quick thoughts, and thanks for those suggestions and ideas. I'd be really comfortable moving inquiries and notices of motion to committees only. I think because those aren't debated, I don't think we need the whole assembly there. So I can see that being a more efficient way of using our time, and also because we tend to finish committees early more frequently than we do council. So I don't have any concerns there. I do have some concerns about lengthening the amount of time that 48 hours to be given for inquiries, or 5 days from the notice of motion to when that motion can be debated. And it's really just because sometimes matters are urgent, and I think a shorter turnaround time is appropriate. And I think just that overall conversation about using inquiries more than motions. And maybe I could just get a bit of clarification as well. Could an inquiry include a question? Like, could an inquiry say, could you come back with options for doing something? Could you come back with options for implementing an X program? Because my worry is that if we're doing inquiries, it comes back in the information report, then we have to ask administration to go come up with the action plan, then come back and then direct the action plan. And I know that there's already a bit of frustration from residents that it takes a really long time for anything to change or happen. And I worry that our approach to reports could extend that further. So just any thoughts on that? Is an inquiry must strictly be information, or it could be information about implementing an action?
I guess I would start by saying it depends on if the potential action you want us to do a full consultation or not. So sometimes when we bring back to council plans or recommendations, there's a clear requirement to do a full consultation, and sometimes there's not. And so I do think it's important to, if there's no formal public consultation required, then I think it's reasonable to come back with options. If there's a full public consultation required to get to those options, then I think it would be unreasonable to ask for that in an inquiry, is how I would start.
That's a really fine distinction. That really helps. And I think that could be a really productive way then to, because I think what can happen so let's say I'm saying, come back for options to implement a new rotation for cleaning the downtown. Let's say something like that. I think that being able to come back with some options right off the bat without having to debate that at the time of giving the motion could really help streamline things. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm babbling. I'm using up my time, but I think that's a really effective way. I think if my understanding of inquiries meaning that it could come back with options for action, but not extending to any full consultation. Yeah, that's very helpful. I think that could be a good approach. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to just quickly jump in as the chair here, and maybe from the clerk's perspective, I know we did change the rules around inquiries and notices of motion. I think it was last term, or maybe it was late in my first term, because, and so I wanted to just get a clear sense of that. In my understanding, just so that when we're discussing this, everyone's coming from the same place, is that in the past, inquiries weren't allowed to even provide options because that would have required some type of work. We're hearing maybe that they could or they couldn't, and I just want to get a sense, is there anything clearly written in our procedures bylaw around that? Just so if we are wanting that opportunity to ask for options that don't require consultation, do we have to change our current rules because are they currently set up to not allow
Yes,
for that?
I think providing clarity on what a individual councillor can direct administration to do versus the collective. And so just a friendly reminder, councillor inquiries used to be called administrative inquiries, and the purpose was more like a question period between the committee and the city manager. So the city manager, when the inquiry came through, had the opportunity to provide a verbal response just to get something dealt with quite quickly. It was then up to the committee or the chair to then ask for administration or the city manager to provide a report. That provision apparently went away over the last number of iterations with the bylaw. So just for clarity, the purpose of inquiries has always been to provide administration with an opportunity to respond quickly with information that was readily available, and it was not intended to direct administration, but if the city manager agrees to that being changed and that's the direction of council, I'll defer to them.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all starting from the same understanding. Mr. Corval, do you have one?
Yeah, and again, it's one of those depend questions. It really does depend on how much work it creates, which is why I think one distinction is public engagement, because that's a helpful distinction. Sure. But, you know, another distinction perhaps could be the amount of time and effort it would take to do that. I definitely feel more comfortable with getting a motion when it's going to be a significant piece of work, because we have to put a lot of resources to that, and those resources alone can end up making budget decisions and things like that.
Appreciate that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Rutherford?
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this. First of all, I agree with Councillor Stevenson's comment about maybe inquiries and notices of motion just at committee. I think that's really clean, helps clear off our council when those big decision-making points are usually there. So I do agree with that. One of the things I thought about is for the notices of motion, kind of say, you know, you have to have that in 5 days before, you know, the motion goes out. But we've kind of used that as then it comes in 5 days. Is there any way that as council we could put a notice of motion and then kind of look at, okay, council is lighter on, like if it's not timely, if it's timely, we can do a minimum of 5 days. But if, you know, there's a lighter agenda 3 council meetings down the road, I could still do a notice of motion for the council meeting on specific date. Is that, and so I'm asking Eileen if that's kind of an option or something that we've considered in the past.
So actually that's already permitted. So hypothetically speaking, if you wanted to give a notice of motion today for a council meeting in April, that's absolutely in order.
Okay, so we could be using that a bit more effectively too then,
Yeah,
right? So
you can, and I'm
because I wasn't aware of that. So this is great information of just like, you know, because we have that, you know, look ahead. We kind of know when there's some really packed council meetings. And so maybe, you know, debating a motion at those really packed council meetings isn't ideal, but one that's a little bit lighter.
Yeah, and trying to be helpful and not rely too heavily on the rules, but these are council's rules, not our rules. And so if a motion, if an inquiry, I'm going to make this up, is going to go on the agenda for February 22nd, and you run out of time on February 22nd, and then you run out of time again in March, and there's only one council meeting, something can only be laid over 2 times, and the purpose is so that it doesn't clog up your agenda. But again, there are pros and cons to creating more flexibility or having more stringent rules, and we can accommodate just about whatever council wants. But just to be clear, if you know something that you want to make in June and you want to give administration 4 months notice, I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Okay. And then my other comment was again similar to Councillor Stevenson. I don't necessarily agree with just doing inquiries and then only then can they lead to motions once the reports come back. I think there are things that are timelier, and I do worry that that is really creating barriers to our work as governors that is unnecessary. My last comment is around just, I don't know how to broach this. The inquiries that went forward this week felt very cuspy to me. I would debate whether they actually don't generate any new work. So I understand that from a time management perspective, it was great. And I know administration said, yeah, no, it's fine. But to me, when I look at those inquiries, it feels very gray to what our current rules are on what can be an inquiry and what can be a motion. So I think we either have to think about how do we make that inquiry a little bit more loose? Because to me, one of the things it says is that inquiries cannot do any analysis. And it seemed like some of those inquiries required analysis on behalf of administration as well as data gathering. Can I get clarity from the city manager or city clerk? Because I just want to make sure we're following our rules. Whatever they are, we need to be following them. And if they're not working, we're not just, doing what makes sense to manage our time.
Sorry, yeah, Councillor, I think I think those three are good examples for us to work through. We're going to try to do it without doing that analysis. I think you're right. It was a bit gray, but I think we assessed that we can probably do it, and I think it was worth trying this time. Yeah, I do think it helps the more advanced we have of looking at the inquiries, and we had some opportunity to do that with this one, which helped. So.
Okay, so.
Sorry, I'm not being very clear. I guess it might depend once we work through these inquiries whether that is the case or not.
So maybe that's a further discussion at the next council services, kind of in using those as case studies about whether it generated more work or not.
Yeah, I think it's a good trial for us, a good pilot for us, if you like, to try. So I welcomed it from that perspective, and we're gonna try to make that work, and then we could perhaps report back when we do bring those inquiries back and comment on whether that worked effectively or not.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Cartmel.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. So first of all, I think that there should be a 5-day advance notice period for either inquiries or notices of motion, because I think that what we're hearing is that there might need to be some determinations about whether something should be an inquiry or a notice of motion. I think you should be able to do that at either committee or at council, because the work at committee is divided into particular areas of focus, and it begs a question about whether an inquiry or a notice of motion is appropriate if it doesn't fit within sort of the realm of that committee. So being able to do either at committee or council, I don't think is really an issue. I think that we should have not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but a very high bar and a lot of rigor about why something isn't an inquiry. And here's why. It's been my observations here in the first 100 days that motions and inquiries are coming on areas that we have already talked about and have already done some work on. That isn't to say that there's not more work to do, but there's a lack of context on a lot of the stuff that's being moved at council and at committee. And I think that the inquiry process requires essentially for administration to bring back a status report on whatever we're talking about. And I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but one of the inquiries passed yesterday is about decriminalization. Councillor McKean moved a motion on decriminalization back, I think, in August. I don't know if the context around that motion that Councillor McKean made is the same as this one. I don't know if it's different. I don't know what admin has done since then. I don't know if we've had response to that work. Making an inquiry about that brings all of that information in a presumably concise summary report that we all get at the same time, which allows us to move forward on a conversation from a shared baseline. Right now, 4 of us have one baseline and 9 of us have another. And I'm not going to say that that everything we could possibly ever talk about has been talked about before in council, but there's very little new. There's nuances, there's refinements, there's evolving perspectives and situations. But there's not a lot that we haven't talked about in some form before. And I think at least as this council gets started, to make it an inquiry first and get that shared baseline before we move into further direction of action would be a shared ethic that we should try to do. So if we start with inquiries out of a personal discipline place, and we provide that 5 days ahead of time, and administration comes back and says, you know, this really isn't something that lives in the world of a status report. This is something that we need to do a bit of work on to bring that back, that information back. Then it becomes a motion, but not before. And if we start that way. Now, some have said, well, that's a delay potentially in being able to move something that's urgent. We can still move a motion without customary notice at any council meeting. So if someone feels that there's something urgent, they can ask that they be permitted to make a motion without customary notice. Someone moves that motion. I move Aaron gets to bring something forward without notice. Somebody seconds that, and then we discuss what Aaron would bring forward before we pass that motion to allow her to bring it forward. And then we agree she can bring it forward and make the second motion. It's a 2-step process, but I think it allows for urgent things to be brought forward. But otherwise, we develop a rigor and a rhythm that says, tell me what we've done so far on this. The report comes on this, and then we talk about whether we need more work on this. And I would like to see that rhythm. I think that would really help things be concise. I'll stop there. I don't know, Councillor Knack, if we're talking about public hearing stuff or not today, if that's on your list of things. I'm sorry I was joined kind of late.
No, fair call. It wasn't on this particular list, and it is tough to say how much time we will have based off the remaining speakers and then the other agenda items. So in terms of good agenda management, we may have time to revisit that, but let's see a little bit later. And if we need to have a further discussion, we can always add it to future council services. So, Councillor Hamilton and guest.
Thank you. So I'm going to sound repetitious. I think it's a bit of a symptom rather than I think the motions and inquiries issue is a bit of a symptom. I don't think it's a substantive change in terms of agenda management to have inquiries and notices of motion go just to committee. And I say that because they're not debatable, so they don't take up time per se. And so I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Cartmel that also notices of like being able to give a notice of motion at a council meeting is very helpful. And sometimes it is debatable whether or not an inquiry will. I've made inquiries that it's not clear what committee you should make it at. You should actually just make it to council. So it helps you sort of ask for information in a timely manner. I've seen times in which a subsequent motion or emotions come forward in the course of debate and it generates a new debate. And that's a moment, as if you're chairing a meeting, that you can put a pin in it and say, you know what, I'm seeing that this is sort of restarting or generating a new debate. Would you consider holding off on that subsequent motion and making it, giving it as notice? And that will give time to refine that conversation. I actually find that, and this is historical, I have found that oftentimes motions are often more often asking for information and I'll say baseline action that doesn't necessarily generate a policy change, but initiates the work that is necessary for sometimes those policy changes. But in my experience, when they generate, those kinds of motions generate a lot of in conversation and debate. Like that to me says that there's something, I'm not going to say wrong with the motion, but that the wording isn't clear. Previous counselors in other terms would say that, you know, it's hard to argue with a request for information, because if you're going to have the debate, you need the information. And when you frame it that way, yes, absolutely. In my mind, if you're asking for information and there's like 12 people that need to speak to it, that's a challenge. That's a homework problem, so to speak. So that means maybe pull it back, work on the wording, find out what the objections may be, so that your work can move forward without haranguing the agenda. So I think, like, as a chair, I'm reflecting on this conversation on how we can chair with discipline when these kinds of conversations come forward. But I also reflect that in my first term on council, and still, if I'm bringing forward a motion, I will not only give the chair and other people who might be working in the space a heads up, but my fellow councillors, because sometimes the surprise is worse than the question itself. And I think about the work Tim and I, Tim will remember this, we did on EDC. It was just meeting with other counselors to hear out their perspective on it so that they weren't feeling ambushed, like information was coming forward that they weren't clear on. So that's what I'm, that's my feedback. I think this is symptomatic of not knowing how to get information. And I'll reflect on, and maybe put this to Mr. Corbold, historically, counselors were essentially told if they wanted information, they had to make a motion or an inquiry. It could be really challenging to have those iterative conversations with administration. And I would wager that is not how you're thinking of approaching your relationship with council going forward, correct?
Yes, that's very correct. I think that's very true, and I think we have come to a different place where we want it to be some back and forth. That's very, very healthy, I think, for the relationship and for the issues, to make sure we're really understanding the issues. So I do encourage those conversations, but it can sometimes get to a point where it's a ton of work. So we just have to, be prepared to draw a line, I would say.
Thanks. That's my time.
Thank you very much, Mayor Sohi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm reflecting back on the 100 days and the two notes of motions that I brought forward. And I'm thinking more about it, why one was, I think, the right approach, the other one was not the right approach. When I think about the anti-racism notes of motion, I think that was the right approach because we need to signal to the community that we take this issue very seriously. And there's there was an urgent issue and community was being hurt and there was violence out there. So I think that was a very strong message that we wanted to send. The only way to do that is actually through a notice of motion or a notice of motion without a customary notice, right? I think in my mind, I think that is going to be proper use of the notice of motions. Then I look back at the other notice of motion that I brought forward was on the childcare, right? And I end up withdrawing that because it's not that childcare is not a important issue, but because there was a process already in place that would give me the answers to those questions. And this is an ongoing conversation. It was not really an urgent matter that we needed to debate. So I think that's the kind of lens that I apply to notice of motions. Another thing I want to share with you is that when I look back at my 8 years as a counselor, I effectively used inquiries to move forward agenda. And I think at that time, inquiries were not as restrictive as they are today. Because today, we can only ask for information that's readily available. But at that time, I think you could ask an inquiry that would do provide you some analysis, or do provide you some little bit extra work that administration would have to do to give you some direction on how to move forward on that particular agenda. I look back on the, I think it was related to merging or, library in Millwoods Town Center and the senior center being built at one place when we were contemplating building them at two different places, right? So I made an inquiry. Can we look at doing a little bit analysis to have them co-locate? I think that's what I think having a little bit more flexibility for us to move our agenda forward through inquiries with some actionable items coming from administration or some recommendation or some analysis coming from administration will allow us to shift away from the notice of motions. So, and I think it was very effective when I was there. I don't know why it was limited, that I don't know. So I just wanted to share that with you. So I agree with Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Rutherford. Maybe we gotta revisit, have some flexibility, maybe some analysis to be done without burdening administration with too much information or too much workload related to it, depending on the amount of analysis that's. I just wanted to share that. That's all.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wright.
I guess maybe looking for a bit of clarification. If we need to confirm that the information is on hand for an inquiry prior to making the inquiry, I guess can we not just ask a question? Like, do we have to wait for a formal memo, or is it just to bring it into the public realm to show the public that we are looking at different issues?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Councillor. No, you can just ask the question, and I think there's lots of evidence over the last 3 months of a councillor asking a question and council getting a lot of memos to answer those questions. That is another source of information. The difference with that system, of course, is it's not done in the public, so it really depends on if you want that question and the answer to be in the public frame, then not the best way of doing it. But if you just want factual information that we often have on hand, just for efficiency, memos work very well for those kinds of things.
Okay, so maybe council can sort of think about why they're asking for this information. Is it to bring it to light in the public, or do you just want the information to help maybe make a decision or form a notice of motion going forward or something too? And then maybe that'll help reduce the amount that's coming forward to council and committee.
Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jans.
Thank you. Sorry. I think part of this is, as it stands right now, there's no opportunity to make a motion either than giving a notice of motion or making a subsequent motion from an item. I think another option may be when you want to put something forward, be it I believe Andre and I were speaking about this, and he used the term creating like a sort of a preliminary report or something that would put an item on the council agenda, so that with a little bit of information or a little bit of background, that from there you could make a motion. The process I was used to at Edmonton Public Schools is if you wanted to move a motion, like say banning junk food in schools, you would say give the notice of motion, and then you would have 2 weeks until the debate. And in that time, you were responsible for writing the report, and you were responsible for pulling the information together and compiling it and then putting it forward. And it would be put forward under your own name, so not the administration, but your own name. That way, you could say, "Here's why I want to ban junk food. Here's why I believe it's important. Here's a whole bunch of people who validate my position." And it was up to the other councillors to then go and sort of do their own research or ask questions. And if you couldn't convince them and sway them, well, your item didn't pass. So ultimately, I mean, just picking on one of the inquiries, I'll say about the decriminalization. I am interested in having that report come back, specifically the report that Toronto received. It was not supposed to be new information. I just wanted a way to table the Toronto report so we could discuss it, and then I could make a subsequent motion from that, contemplating a request to the federal government for a Section 56 exemption. So the only way for me to do that, as I understood it, was a notice of motion. And then, for a variety of reasons, agenda management, etc., we decided it'd be easier to talk about it as an inquiry. And as I said to Andre and administration, really, my expectation is just the tabling of the Toronto report. That's what I was looking for. So similarly, Halifax is just an enormous body of work around policing. I'm interested in seeing that report tabled. Do I need to move a motion for that? Could it be an inquiry for that? Is there another way just to say, here's this report from another jurisdiction? It requires no new work. It's just a copy paste. How do we get that forward for debate? Because really, I think that for me is the crux of this issue here is how do we get information, sway the body, and help direct action? And that is that's what I'm kind of struggling, or not struggling with, what I'm kind of reflecting on in this conversation. There must be more nimble and more agile ways for us to have these debates, and if you write a crummy report and you're not ready, then it gets referred back for more information, or it gets voted down and you blew your chance for a year to have that debate. So yeah, I appreciate the thoughts raised, but that's sort of I just wanted to share that context.
Thank you very much. So I think I'll go and use my time. This conversation has been harder for me to summarize, and that's okay, because I've heard some different perspectives. Maybe first I'll ask a question then to help lead this. So while I've heard different perspectives, I think one of the things that we do absolutely need to resolve is how much notice is provided in advance so that there can be that clear understanding by both the clerks and then frankly the chair, going back to Councillor Hamilton's point about chairing with discipline, of is what's being asked for either an inquiry or a notice of motion, and have we done, is that information readily available? So I guess to the clerks right now, again, I think the challenge that you would have from the clerk's perspective is that inquiries could come to you as late as the Saturday before the council meeting without any previous notice before that, correct?
Yes, the notice requirements for inquiries is 48 hours before a meeting.
So there's no requirement for you to be made aware earlier, which means you potentially have to have people working on the weekend to determine whether something is valid. So that's an issue, I think.
That's the first issue. And the second issue is I need permission from a councillor in order to share that with administration. That also can delay the process.
Perfect. So that's one issue. And then the other is on notices of motion. There is no requirement to give, say, a notice of a notice, if you will. We can do that at any point in time, but then again, similar to an inquiry, we don't know if that motion was maybe worded well in a way that can create an effective debate.
Yes, and so in previous memos to council, I have asked if we can get notices of motion. A notice is not the motion. A notice is intention of making a motion.
Yeah.
If we're going to add like that into a 3-step process, I'm not sure that is the most helpful way, but right now we have no way of necessarily knowing what a notice of motion is going to be until it's made.
Yeah.
And then administration sometimes has barely 5 days to figure out if it's able to respond, and sometimes there's multiple. From the last council, I think one time we had 6 of them on a council agenda.
That's right. And Mr. Corbold, it looks like you also want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the inquiries, one cleanup item which we'd like to do no matter what is when the inquiry is sent to the city clerk, if it could be sent to my office at the exact same time. That has happened in a lot of cases anyways, but it's not required, and it would skip the step of the clerk having to ask permission to share it, which would be
so you'd like efficient. To see that as a potential requirement for council to provide that notice of motion, and then ideally, hopefully, maybe a few days earlier than the 48 hours, so that
that would be ideal. But I and I think it might change if we're going to use a lot more inquiries, and if we got a lot on Saturday, that would be a difficult situation, I think.
I'll
But
come back to that
we
point.
can work
So-
on weekends. So.
So I'm just watching reactions, and I don't have everyone's camera. I get to see about 8 of you. So I didn't necessarily see anyone concerned with the notion of being able to being asked to require it to be sent to the city manager as well as the clerks and the chair. And so I'm not seeing any major concerns with that. I think that's something we can formally do, and I'll come to Councillor Jans afterwards here. Then the other piece is just an appropriate amount of time, which I think if we require 5 days for notices of motion, there might be value in aligning it, just so we don't have city staff having to potentially work over the weekend. So I think we'll look to maybe head down that path, recognizing there wasn't full agreement on everything. The only other comment I'll offer, and then I'll go to the last two, and then see if we can put this all together in a motion so that we can advance ourselves to the next item. Where I think there's some challenges, because I actually do disagree a little bit with Mayor Sohi on opening up inquiries too much. I think part of why we changed it was that sometimes one councillor wanted to bring something forward that was not clearly going to get the support of a majority at all. And so by asking administration to do a lot of work on something that was not likely to pass, it felt like not the greatest use of time. And so that is why we sort of pushed inquiry to be information on hand, and notices of motion and motions to be asking for more information, so that council can essentially give their okay to say, please go ahead and do that work, because we want to get more detail on it. So I'm a little hesitant to go and loosen the inquiry piece. I really like what Councillor Hamilton had said, which is just, if we have proper notice and we can do our due diligence with that proper notice, the chair can hold us a bit more accountable in each of the cases. So I think in my mind, I'm leaning more towards that. So, but I'm out of time. I'm going to go to Councillor Jans and then Councillor Hamilton, and then we'll see if we can put something together here for us and Mayor Sohi after. Councillor Jans.
Sorry, I was just trying to get clarification on that last part there. I'm not sure if I heard correctly. Is it a requirement that councillors share inquiries and motions with the city manager prior to making them?
It is not right now.
But the request is that it would be ideal to have that, as what we've just heard. So something we may want to consider.
I think I would philosophically struggle with that a little bit. I think it could be, for most things, good practice, but I can think of instances where I've made motions or I've had very controversial items that I certainly did not want to share with administration prior to making them in other bodies. And I think the neutrality of the assembly and the neutrality of councillors, I think, has to be preserved. I can see certainly on a lot of items that this could be helpful in terms of getting guidance, etc. But I'm wary of any kind of legislative encumbrance or notice around anything that we have a complex reporting relationship where both the auditor and the city manager are our employees. So I can think of, I'm just not comfortable with that. I would really want that it's up to you to move your motions and it's courtesy to notify the chair, but certainly I wouldn't want any sort of formal reporting relationship as far as motions go. That's all.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, so one of the things I heard in your summary, Councillor Knack, was that right now, like a really quick fix is to add business days on inquiries to 2 business days, because in my mind, submitting something on a Thursday morning for a Monday morning meeting is probably a bit more manageable. I can't see a city manager than submitting it on a Saturday for a Monday morning. And then, because I think it's, even with notices of motion, I think the practice is 5 business days, not 5 round days. So you can't submit something on a Thursday for a Monday, so to speak. So maybe some clarification on that. So that's that to me is a really quick fix, and I look to the city manager to make sure that that would clear up some of the challenges. And I think whenever I've made an inquiry, I've given the relevant city department a heads up, even if it was something that I was making really quickly. And I think that's just a matter of consideration and respect, because if I was duplicating work or something was already in process, I would like to know before commencing debate or asking administration to commence a lot of work. And I think there's a time for accountability, but I also think we have to be accountable. And one of those accountabilities is respecting the time and efforts of our administration. So that's what I'm, those are some cleanups for me, but I don't see it as particularly problematic affording the city manager the respective and natural justice, frankly, of being able to prepare for a meeting in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Sohi, we should just get clarification. The notice of motion, is it 5 business days or is it 5 days?
As far as I know, it's 5 days, but
5
I'm
days.
just triple checking.
Okay,
yeah,
so
it's as far as I know, it's 5 days.
5 days.
That's why it can be made an executive committee for a council meeting.
Correct, so it could still come in on the Wednesday. So, okay, Councillor Hamilton's suggestion, I appreciate it. Just at least aligning those, whatever that might be, whether it's 5 business days, 2 business days, we should probably be the same. So, Mayor Sohi, then Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I think this whole conversation is going to be helpful overall, even if we don't bring forward any motions, because it's allowing us to have this conversation. But I think whatever we do, we need to always keep in mind, and I disagree with you on this, Councillor Knack, that I see inquiries and motions as a tool for us to push forward on the agenda on which we were elected to do so, right? And so if it pushes administration or require resources from administration to do some of that additional work, I think that is okay in my mind, right? Because we want to change status quo. We want to change our society for better, right? And sometimes that requires additional resources, absolutely. It may not have the consent of the entire council, but generating a report allows us to have a debate, then ability for us to have the conversation, and then probably move forward toward that consent and support and moving forward with the agenda. So, and it worked really well without burdening administration before the changes were made. I think changes probably were made because, because someone maybe thought about having an agenda controlled, right? I don't want to limit our council members' ability to move forward on the things they're passionate about, whether they do through that motion or do their inquiry. At the same time, making sure that we manage our time properly, right? So I think we need to keep that in mind, because we're here to, we're elected to bring change to our communities, and how we do that is important. And the tools that we have are important, that we don't limit those tools, but also be cognizant of the time that we need to invest on those and how we manage that, right? So I kind of respectfully disagree with you on that, Councillor Knack, that inquiries should not be requiring more work from administration, because otherwise status quo will remain, and we'll get information reports, and will take longer for us to move the agenda, the ambitious agenda that Edmontonians gave us.
Thank you very much.
Can I just perhaps comment?
Yep, please go ahead.
Councillor? Yeah, I think, Your Worship, from our perspective, we definitely can make that happen, and there's no concerns. I also would say that there's nothing that prevents the city manager from, if I have a huge concern about a particular inquiry and the amount of work it would cause and the time we would take to do it, there's nothing that prevents me from speaking directly to the councillor who's making that inquiry, and perhaps speaking to the committee chair about, you know, other options. And we've done this, and that's worked well. There's some relationship pieces that allow us to have those conversations as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Wright, then Councillor Jans, and I think we might have a draft motion that we can consider. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I think you just answered my question. I was wondering, although I appreciate all the discussion and conversation and getting everybody's perspectives on this, I was just wondering if there was a decision point on at some point today, or whether a motion had to be made to sort of bring together everything that we've talked about. So
yes,
I'll await that motion. Thank you.
Sounds good. Councillor Jans.
I had a question. A motion requires a seconder. Hasn't it ever been contemplated that a inquiry requires a seconder?
No.
Interesting. Okay, so and could the clerk clarify? So the idea of the seconder is at least one other person at the dais wants to see this item debated. If you have no seconder, if it's just one person, it cannot proceed, right?
Yeah, and I would need to go back to Roberts to get the exact wording, but just because you second something doesn't mean you agree with it. It's just it is an indication that it is worth the discussion.
Okay. I wonder then to Chair Knack would be, could a contemplation of a seconder for inquiries help prevent those sort of rogue inquiries that it seems like we may have changed practice to overcompensate for? That's all I have.
It's an interesting question, and not to ignore it, but I think that might require a little bit more time to discuss than we probably have available based on the current agenda. So I'm intrigued by your suggestion. Just I think we need to maybe think about further meeting management discussion later, just so we can make sure we get through everything. I'll go to Councillor Principe, and then I think we've got the wording of the motion that we can put on the floor here.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm really appreciating this conversation. I don't really have a lot of input, but I've done a lot of listening, and I appreciate all the comments that were made. And yeah, so I just want to say I really appreciated this conversation because I felt it was real. It didn't feel very political, like too structured. It just felt like we were all discussing and chatting and putting out our thoughts and brainstorming. So I thought that this was very productive. Thank you. You did a great job chairing it.
Well, don't say that yet. We still have one more item on the agenda. So what I'll do is based off what I've heard, I think I'm willing to put forward this motion, and recognizing we might not all agree and you might request a split, but on some of the common themes I think I heard. So what I'll do is we'll get that on the screen, and I think we probably will make it clear on the third point, recognizing there's a disagreement about whether it should be notified, the city manager should be notified for an inquiry, but I'm willing to make that clear in the motion.
So inquiry or notice of motion?
Inquiry. Yeah. So there's 3 items, and we'll get the wording up. And sorry, that was just the last minute addition, but I'll start reading it out as it's going up. During a standing committee, so I'll move that during a standing, we're going to delete section, so this will be a recommendation to council for bylaw changes. And the motion would be for one regarding time limits, that we would delete section 38, section 5, and replace with during a standing committee or council committee meeting or council meeting, a councillor may ask questions or speak multiple times in relation to a single item for a maximum of 5 minutes for the first round and 3 minutes for any subsequent rounds. The next item would be councillor inquiries, that we would amend section 24E by removing 48 hours and replacing it with 5 days. And then the third part.
Sorry, I was just multitasking there, so if I can just read this out. So just under inquiries, the third part would be to include provisions to notify the chair, the city manager, and the city clerk in advance.
Correct, that's the third part. So those are the 3 parts of the motion. and I'll just briefly introduce it. And so again, what I think I heard is that there was a desire to retain 5 minutes for sure for speaking and at least a first round. There were some mixed comments about reduced time for second rounds and beyond, but I think there was enough that I felt that we should at least put this on the floor as a motion. Then with regards to inquiries, we're just aligning the time by saying 5 days. That aligns it with the requirement for notice of motion as well. So I thought it would be, instead of requiring it to be provided by the Saturday, just let's align that together. And the third piece is making sure the inquiry is provided to the city manager as well, just so they have that advance information. And I recognize that not everyone might agree with that. And if there are any requests to split that, that is perfectly in order as well. But those are the three common themes I felt comfortable putting forward in the form of a motion. There were a lot of other great points that were raised today, but I didn't feel comfortable trying to put it into a motion here, and I thought these might be the most acceptable for us to help clear up some of what we've talked about today. So I see some folks on the board. We're going to just do questions first, and then if you want to speak to it, you're welcome to after. But questions first, Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you. This question is to the mover. Do you think we could amend, can you just scroll down to number 2, please, City Clerk, Madam City Clerk, to number 2, so I can see number 2?
Sorry, we're pretty limited with our abilities to scroll through in this, so it is in eScribe. We'll try to figure out how to make sure that you can see this. I've also put it in the chat that it's also in eScribe.
So for councillor inquiries, point number 1, is it possible, can we amend that to 2 days if we're not changing the scope of inquiries? Because again, if it's just for seeking information, and I get the 2, and maybe instead of 48 hours, we say 2 business days, but I feel like five days is a bit excessive just for questions related to not generating any additional information. So unless we're expanding the scope of inquiries, that would be a different conversation, but the amendment on the floor, as I understand it, and you could clarify, Councillor Knack, is to not change the scope.
Correct, yeah, and so to your question, if there was no desire to change, because right now it's 2 days, so if you wanted to leave it at 2 days, we could just, it would essentially be not voting in favor of that particular change. We wouldn't need to amend the motion.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
I don't think what I'm trying to say is not 48 hours, but 2 business days. Because what I heard is that with 48 hours notice, it can cause administration to have to work on the weekends.
Okay.
So I do want to see a change.
Perfect.
But I don't necessarily think 5 days is required. I think 2 business days would be what I would recommend instead of and remove 48 hours.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, for me, that's assuming a council meeting's on a Monday, it would typically be the Thursday. But yeah, I'm comfortable with it being 2 business days, so I'm fine with that change. But I'll see if that is a friendly change first, because it doesn't just have to be friendly to me; it has to be friendly to the Assembly. And this would just be speak up if you don't think it's friendly. I'm not hearing any, so that's fine. Thank you.
And then I do have a request to split number 3.
Perfect. Yep.
The one on the requiring us to share with city manager, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll happily make that split when we do the vote there. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford, for that amendment. Or was that moved? Is that friendly? Is there a motion on the floor?
It was friendly. It was friendly. So we're going to change that. It will be reflected soon. Yeah.
Okay. I have a more substantive amendment to this related to part 1, which is about limiting the second round of questions at council and committee meetings. I'm going to amend that this is piloted at committee meetings first before we change it in the bylaws. That's my motion, because I think it's worth comparing, 1, having a comparison, and 2, worth some circumspection between before we make a substantial change to the bylaws. So I'm moving that we pilot limiting second or subsequent rounds to 3 minutes at committee, but keeping it at 5 minutes for council meetings for now.
Thank you. And maybe to expedite it, I'm comfortable with that as a friendly amendment, but I'm going to look to see if others would deem that friendly. I'm seeing Councillor Wright, if you do not, yeah, if anyone does not feel that is friendly, just say it's not friendly, and then we'll debate the amendment. Okay.
I did just want to ask a question. Does this also apply to public hearings?
No,
No.
just to be absolutely clear, the public hearing process is a statutory process. Nothing that you're talking about here impacts that. That's a completely separate process. And if council is looking to pilot changes, that doesn't require a change in the bylaw. It does require a special resolution of council. Council's the only one that can change its own rules, and there is provisions for that in the bylaw. So if Councillor Hamilton, just for clarity, we would need to actually change this. So are you looking to pilot all of this? And then we'll come back in 6 months rather than us changing the bylaw, or is it change the bylaw for 2 and 3 and 1 is a pilot option? Just so I'm clear on what you're asking for.
I think so under councillor inquiries, point 1 and point 2 are, in my mind, they're cleanup motions that the bylaw misses. So I don't personally see the need to pilot that, although other councillors may. I'm strictly referring to part 1 under the time limits.
So with that in mind, I'll just jump in to make sure the amendment, which I'm okay with it being friendly, is that first section around the minutes that we're speaking would be friendly. And now with Councillor Wright's question asked, is there anyone who would feel that is not friendly? I'm not hearing any, so I'm going to accept that as friendly just to keep us. And I know we have to update the wording to reflect that, so that'll take a few moments. But we've got some others on the board, so I can go to them while we're updating that wording, which I know might be a slight pain. But Councillor Paquette?
Thank you. To the mover, I missed it. Did you introduce this? The rationale?
Yes.
Okay. I missed that then. So let me ask you then, because I am frankly deeply concerned with this motion. It seems to me that what we're saying with this motion is that council lacks the ability to self-regulate, and so we have to change rules that have worked for successive councils. And just a response to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I introduced it, I was mentioning how this is what I think I heard, which wasn't complete unanimous agreement amongst that change.
Oh, okay. I recall.
So I'm comfortable with it, but appreciate your point. I know not everyone might agree. I just felt that there was enough that I thought these would be the 3 points that council should vote on more immediately, and then if there's any further larger scale changes that we would do that as a group at a later time.
Yeah, and of course council can change the rules as they will, as long as it's staying within the rules. But so going from 5 minutes to 3 minutes does not substantially change the ability to debate, because you can just keep doing more rounds. So that's sort of my concern there. Does this fundamentally make a difference if we can just continue to ask rounds of questions, and that potentially a 5-minute round of questions becomes a 6-minute round of questions, and so we end up defeating the purpose?
Is that a question to me as the mover?
Yeah.
I mean, it is quite possible. I mean, to your point, there's some self-regulation that's involved. Maybe this doesn't change anything, but I think that it was worth at least bringing onto the floor based off what I heard.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And as for the provision to notify on an inquiry, that one's a little bit odd to me, because unless we're fundamentally changing what inquiries are, which I've kind of heard that folks might want to change inquiries into motions without the attendant debate required per motion, which is also deeply concerning to me. I'm not sure why. Well, I guess it's changed to 48 hours now, but while I do want to obviously keep everyone in the loop, sometimes you just want to make an inquiry and it's not really a big deal. So I'm a little bit worried about this sort of overregulation. So I'm just wondering if you can just sort of speak to that a little bit, to the mover.
Sure. I mean, you know, I can't speak to how others have done it. I've always notified administration of an inquiry before I've made it, so that when I'm about to notify the chair and the clerk, it's already made its way through the appropriate folks. So for me, it doesn't actually change anything at all, other than when I'm notifying the clerks and the chair, I'll add in the city manager onto that email, which, again, for me, it doesn't feel like that much of a change since I've already run things by administration.
Yeah, and I believe that's my habit as well, but I'm thinking beyond myself, and I'm thinking about like every rule we make here isn't just for us, it's for future councils unless they change rules. And I just a little bit of concern that even though my approach is in line with what this motion is talking about, it may not be others' approaches, and there may be good reason for that in the future. And so I do get a little bit concerned about that as well. So thoughts?
Yeah, again, I think there's been a request to split because not everyone was in agreement with that particular change, at least on the notifying of the city manager. So I thought there would be a split vote. I was comfortable making it because I am comfortable doing it, but I also appreciate it might not be a majority of council. So,
well, the problem is it might be a majority of this council. That's the problem.
And yeah, and if
all right,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair.
No problem. Councillor Jans. There you are, Councillor Jans.
Nope. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to move to divide the question, but I believe that's already been. Has it been formally moved?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We'll split it when we vote. So absolutely.
Okay. Good. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Hi. I just with the rewording there. You've got adding business before 48 hours. So what is actually 48 business hours? Are we talking on the 67.5 work week or the 40-hour work week? I think it should be, and I think what Councillor Rutherford had indicated was 2 business days. Because if we're talking business hours, that 48 could break down to 6 or 7 days.
Thanks for that clarification. That was my understanding of the that point 1 would be amended to say 2 business days was the intent of Councillor Rutherford. Is that correct when you made that?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So we'll just make sure that's updated so we're all on the same understanding, so that the requirement for inquiries would be 2 business days.
And I just thank you. And I just wanted to get some clarification on the purpose of advising the city manager. I think that was to get permission then to share back with the rest of council. Was that the purpose?
No, or actually, I think Mr. Corbold was probably best suited to answer that question.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's about if you want help with the inquiry and putting the inquiry together, we just need to know. So that was the idea. If I know there's a notice of inquiry, then we can help make sure that inquiry is in order, and we can help understand what the requirements are going to be to satisfy the inquiry. And if there's a decision not to do that, inform the city manager, that's fine. We just won't be able to help you with your inquiry until it's then on the table, and then we can do our best to help you at that point.
Okay, thank you. And then, Madam Clerk, you said that I know you're doing these changes on the fly. You said that the motion was in eScribe. I'm trying to find it and I've refreshed a few times.
So I believe if you're in your iPad, which I'm not, there's a bar there that you can click on.
I don't use the iPad. No, I'm
okay, but
on
still
my laptop.
the motion will be there under item 6.4. I've also put it in a separate Google Doc that you should be able to see, and we can also put it up on the screen.
Okay, and again, not seeing it in eScribe. I've got a blank verbal report document.
There should be, it should say view casted motion. And so the motion's actually in the system under the council item, council agenda management, verbal report. And the reason I know it's there is because my team's displaying it. But I've also
Okay, and again, this is eScribe, not Diligent, correct?
It's in eScribe, and I've also put it in the team chat for you as well. I've created a Google Doc just so that you can see it, and I apologize. We have limited capacity to reduce the font size to get the whole thing up on the screen at one time.
I'll keep searching eScribe. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So I just, with that in mind, I want to make sure everyone has it. We've read it out. I have nobody else on the list, so I'm ready to go to, we can go to a vote, and I should note that the request was to divide, so we'll vote on the 3 changes separately. The first one would be just quickly the pilot, so that council approve a pilot for all standing committees. Councillor may ask questions or speak to multiple times in relation to a single item for a maximum of 5 minutes for the first round and 3 minutes for any subsequent rounds. So that is motion 1. And with nobody else on the board, I will call the vote on the first motion. Just what I've read out. Please vote. And it will show up on eScribe soon, so hang tight. There we are.
I believe the mayor has left, so he is absent for this vote, and we're just waiting for Councillor Jans. We have all the votes.
Thank you. Please display the vote. That is carried. Next is section 2, which is the change to the bylaw which would require 2 business days notice for the inquiry. And this is just changing that part of it. Then we'll vote separately on the next part, which is the requirement to notify the city manager. So just on changing it to 2 business days for the inquiry instead of 2 days. Please vote. Yeah, no worries, no rush. There it is.
Just waiting for 2 more votes. Councillor Wright? We got all the votes.
Thank you. Please display the vote. And that is carried. And finally is the part where the inquiry would also be circulated to the city manager as well as the clerks and the chair. Please vote.
Sorry, can we see the precise wording on? There we go.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, absolutely. Let's just make sure we read out that wording. Sorry, thank you. That wording is that, it's going up and back. It's all good. Include provisions to notify the city manager, chair, and city clerk in advance as per section 2. Oh, I do see a question on that, so I'll wait before we call the vote. I'll go to questions. We'll bring up the speakers.
Point of order, it's not letting me click in to eScribe. It's saying that there's no discussion at this time. I thought we were able to speak to motions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sorry, yeah, I didn't know if anyone. My apologies. So we'll let people speak to this. Go ahead, Councillor Rutherford, and anyone else is welcome to click in to speak to this. Councillor Rutherford, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to speak to this because I'm going to be voting no to this specific item, not because I don't plan to notify the city manager and share that collaboratively, but I agree with Councillor Paquette's assessment that, putting this into legislative requirements for us to do that is really binding our hands. And so I urge my council colleagues to think thoughtfully about whether we want that level of requirement in our bylaws or whether we can just do that in practice on our own in that collaborative approach that we've taken so far. So that is why I will be voting no to this one. And I do encourage my council colleagues to support, to not support this motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else on the list, and I don't think I need to close. So, there's Councillor Rice. So we'll do that, and then Councillor Rice.
For the same reason, just Councillor Rutherford mentions, I will vote no as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else on the board, so I will call the vote. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that has been defeated. Perfect. Well, we have done that item. Next item is, or the last item was 6.3, council vaccination policy. That's a verbal report. Now, I think that was going to be led by the mayor, and he is no longer here. So I don't actually have the notes of what we were going to discuss. That puts us in a slightly odd situation. I believe the intent, and I don't know, Mr. Corbold, are you aware, was the intent to essentially have a council policy that was aligned with what is currently City of Edmonton policy?
Don't want to speak to any intent,
Yeah.
but I can speak to the facts. The current facts are that we have a mandatory vaccination policy for the city administration, which includes all city employees, and that policy allows for, encourages strongly that everybody be vaccinated, but for those who choose not to, that you can take testing as an accommodation on a routine testing basis. And the fact is that that policy does not apply to City Council at this point in time. So.
Well, I think since this was going to be led by the mayor and a motion to change that policy would have to go up to council anyways, I would suggest that maybe it would be wise to requisition this so that Mayor Sohi has the chance to actually introduce it, since it would likely come to council anyways. That would be my advice, because he also would be the person probably answering questions in this item, so I don't know if anyone clicked on to ask questions who you'd be directing them to at this moment. So that would be my recommendation, because I don't think we can actually have a conversation without the person who is going to lead this. So if folks are comfortable with that approach, we would need 2 people to requisition in order to send that up to council. Councillor Tang?
Requisition.
Thank you. And Councillor Rutherford, is that what you're also on the board to do? I need a second person, so if you can be the second person.
I had a question about the can we specify which council meeting it goes to again, just in terms of agenda management?
So automatically it'll go to the next council meeting, sorry to interrupt, which is February 22nd, 24th.
That one's already really packed, right?
Say your agendas are fairly robust.
Fair enough. Okay, I'm not gonna second that.
Okay. Councillor Wright? Do we have a...
I know you're just looking for a second, but is there any way, in light of restrictions that might be removed here this week, is there any way that it could be put forward sooner?
Well, I mean, I would suggest that we are going to potentially have a verbal report tomorrow, that it would likely be in order for someone at that meeting to make a motion related to this, probably. It's maybe borderline. I would seek the guidance from the clerks.
To be honest, right now, since there's nobody here to speak to the item, it's just delete it from your agenda and then pick it up again if need be, based on the conversation or the update you're going to get from the city manager, maybe tomorrow or maybe on February 22nd.
And I can confirm you will get a pretty big update from us tomorrow morning, including some recommendations to council.
So is it...
Thank you for that guidance.
Thank you.
I'll leave it as is.
Thank you. Just to check, Madam Clerk, so to delete the item, we would require a motion.
Well, to be fair, you've already just discussed an item so you can't delete something you've just done. I'd postpone it indefinitely, and then we'll bring it back on the table if required.
Okay. I'll take if somebody wants to make that motion to postpone indefinitely.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. We only need a mover on that, so I'll call the votes unless there's any questions. I'll just double check the speakers board. I don't see anyone. So no, we'll call the question on that. Please vote on indefinite postponement.
Councillor Paquette? Thank you. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That is carried. All right. Well, that's it, everyone. We'll do a quick check for notices of motion. I'm not seeing or hearing any. Therefore, we are adjourned with a few minutes to spare. Thanks, everyone.